class, welcome to Advantage. I'm Virginia, and today we're going to do part 2 of subject-verb agreement. So if you haven't seen the first video, I recommend that you probably go take a look at that first. So let's get started, okay? So we have subject-verb agreement now. Another rule for subject-verb agreement is when we're talking about indefinite pronouns. So if you remember about pronouns in your past grammar studies, you would know that pronouns do what? They take the place of the noun, right? So in this case though, it is not a pronoun that's going to refer to a specific noun, okay? So there won't be a noun like Sally or store or education. So it's not going to be a specific noun, okay? Some of these indefinite pronouns are going to always be singular. So remember, subject and verb have to agree in number and person. So in this case, there are some that are going to take a singular, right? So we have like anyone, everyone, anybody, each, one, either, neither, right? Those are indefinite pronouns that will take a singular verb. For example, everyone likes our teacher. So we have the indefinite pronoun everyone, and we have the verb likes with an S, right? We had to add an S because it's a singular indefinite pronoun here, okay? Now, another rule is that there are some indefinite pronouns that are going to be plural, okay? So some of these are like both, few, many, others, and several. So those are indefinite pronouns that are going to take a plural verb. So for example, many people are attending the fair. So we have many. We know that the verb is going to have to be in a plural, right? So are. It would not be is. Okay, very important there. All right, so now let's talk about subject-verb agreement with there plus the verb to be. Okay, so now let's continue with another rule for subject-verb agreement, and it's when we use there plus the verb be. So we use this when we want to explain that something exists, right? So we use there plus the verb be. Also, the subject of the sentence is generally found after the verb be. We kind of talked about that in the first video, how sometimes you're going to find the subject after the verb to be. So in this case, that rule does apply when we're using there, okay? So here's some examples of these two rules. So the first sentence here, there is a 2-hour delay on the freeway. So you see the sentence starts with there, and then we have the verb to be in present tense is. So here we're using a singular form, right? Because what is the subject? Well, the subject is going to be after the verb to be. Delay, right? Delay. So with delay, then we're going to use the verb is instead of are. Here's another example. There are 5 concerts at the stadium today, right? So again, we have the sentence starting with there. We have your verb are, because the subject then is after, right? Concerts. Okay, so you see how we do that? So again, subject-verb agreement with there plus be, and this is when and how you use it, okay? So now let's talk about prepositional phrases. Okay, so now we're going to talk about prepositional phrases. We kind of touched on it in the first video, and I said this would be in part 2. So let's go ahead and talk about prepositional phrases. When we're trying to find the subject, because sometimes students have a hard time, well, what is the subject of this sentence so that I know whether the verb is in agreement or not? So one of the things we want to do then is to find the prepositional phrases first along with the verb. So we said that in part 1, find your verb and then it'll be easier to find your subject. The same with prepositional phrases. Here's why. Sometimes prepositional phrases come in the beginning of a sentence. When they're in the middle of the sentence, it doesn't really affect the verb as much because prepositional phrases can be in the beginning, in the middle, or at the end of a sentence. but when they're in the beginning is when they cause the most issues for ESL students. So, for example, in the first one, we have in the garden, the roses are lovely, okay? So we know that we have the verb are here, but if we're like, well, what's the subject, right? Well, we know the subject is not going to be in this prepositional phrase, so it is not garden. So if we leave that out, right, put parentheses around that, that's out. Then we have the roses are lovely, okay? The next one, the same thing, near the market is a museum that is free on Wednesday. So we see that we have near the market, and we also have another one down here. Not that it affects the subject, so it doesn't affect the subject, but this one might, right? Is a museum that is free. So what's the subject? Well, we know we have the verb is, and we know the rule for subjects when it concerns the verb to be, right? Where do we find the subject? Usually after the verb to be. So here we have museum. So these are in agreement, okay? Near the market is a museum that is free on Wednesday, okay? All right, let's go ahead and talk about now collective nouns, count nouns, and non-count nouns when we're doing subject-verb agreement. Now let's go ahead and talk about countable nouns, collective nouns, and non-count nouns when we're looking for the subject-verb agreement, okay? So here we have collective nouns. So collective nouns are nouns when we're talking about more than one person. So it implies that there's more than one, okay? For example, team, family, class, and group. Those are considered collective nouns, all right? They're implying that there's more than one person in a team, in a family, right? In a group. So here we have the group meets every week, right? So what is the subject here? We have the group. It's a collective noun. So what are we going to do with the verb? We're going to add an S because it takes a singular form. So the group meets every week, okay? Now let's go to the non-count nouns. Non-count nouns always take a singular verb. And if you remember anything about non-count nouns, these are nouns that cannot be counted. And if we do count them, there's usually some kind of way that we count them, right? So like, for example, a lot of liquids like milk or soda, we don't count. Those are non-countable. But we can say a bottle or a can because we can count those. So, but these are non-count nouns and they also take a singular. All right, so let's look at an example here when we have education. Education is non-count. We can't count education. We can't add an S to it to make it a plural, right? So it's non-count. We have the verb is the key to success, right? Takes a singular. So in this case, we're going to use is for the verb to be, all right? Now we have countable nouns, which is just like the word says. They're countable. You can count them. And so these will take a plural form of the verb, okay? For example, earnings, goods, odds, contents, etc. What do you notice about these words? Yeah, they have an S already in them, okay? We don't say earning. We can't use earning in this way here for a non-countable, okay? So here's an example. The earnings, so we have a countable noun, earnings for this quarter exceed, this is the verb, exceed expectations. So because it's plural, we don't add an S to it, right? Okay, so now you have five new rules that you learned today to help you with your subject-verb agreement. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you join me next week when we'll have another video up for you. Thank you.